Hey everyone, I'm the Saipan Sailor, and this is episode 3 of Fire in the Yukon. Now, this is a turning point in this story, so stay with me. You ready? Let's do this. Now, in the last episode, I left off when we sailed out of Barbers Point, Hawaii. We left her and set a course for Incheon, Korea. The very next morning, I was on watch from 4 to 8, and my watch partner asked me, he said, "We got some work to do. You want to work some overtime?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." Now, back then, I was pretty lazy. I wasn't really into making money. I wasn't into doing a whole lot of work. I was a young kid. And on that watch, it usually meant after breakfast, about 8:30, return and burn. But after I ate breakfast, I didn't feel like working. I went to my forecastle, climbed in my bunk, and fell asleep. Now, I want to explain how this ship was designed. It's an old steamship, and a lot of those tankers, a lot of steamships were built this way. The engine room was pretty well separated from the main house where everyone lived and where the wheelhouse was. So just aft of the house, or astern, or in layman's terms, in back of the house, was the upper engine room, which came up from the main deck, went up one deck, and then there was the stack funnel. Uh, Back then we called it the fiddly, the upper engine room. Now, outside where the stack funnel was, they had a bunch of old empty 55-gallon oil drums, and there was an old stores crane on the starboard side, which is the right side of the ship. And they wanted to get rid of that stores crane. They weren't using it anymore. For some reason, they just wanted to cut it out and scrap it. Now, in episode 1, I told you why one of the reasons we were going to the shipyard was because they had a fuel tank that was leaking. It had a crack in it. That tank, they had pumped it out and stripped it, meaning they got as much oil out of it as they could, but it was not gas free. And I guess they figured, well, when they get to the yard, they'll just open the manholes and stick some blowers in there and let it vent for a couple of days until it is gas free. So they left it like it was. But above that stores crane, okay, or excuse me, on the main deck, below the stores crane, where they had these guys working with a torch, cutting up the crane, was the top of that tank. And on top of the tank was what we call a gooseneck. Okay, it's a vent which is U-shaped. Okay, and it just happened to be there. Well, this was going on while I was sleeping. While they were cutting with the torch on the stack deck, a piece of hot metal had fallen down on the main deck, right next to that tank vent. And this metal was red hot, and the fumes from that tank were coming out of the vent. And that piece of hot metal ignited the fumes, and it got sucked right into that tank. Now this was about 10:30 in the morning. I was jolted awake when the ship started shaking. And what it felt like to me immediately was, well, we were doing probably 8, 10 knots, maybe 12 knots, I'm not sure. It felt like they ran it full astern. In other words, they started turning the prop the other way to stop the ship. And if, of course, the prop is going to cavitate going that fast, and the ship's going to start shaking. But that's not what was happening at all. That tank was building up pressure. Well, I sat up in my bunk and the ship stopped shaking, and it was what we like to call a dead calm. Now, if you're familiar with that term, that is one scary moment because you're wondering what's going to happen next. Obviously, the ship had lost power. There wasn't any the usual noises coming from the engine room, you know, what you're used to, and the usual vibrations. It was a dead calm. Well, I don't know how long that lasted. I don't remember, okay? My mind kind of blocked it out. Because what happened next is that tank had exploded. Now, I want to tell you what it sounds like, okay? If you were to take, if you know what a steel drum is, 55-gallon oil drum, if you were to take an empty one and hit that thing with a mallet as hard as you can, it's going to ring like a bell because it's made of metal. Now, if you took that sound and magnified it about 50 times, that's what this sounded like a big boom. And not so much a building exploding or whatever. This was a steel tank, and it was right beneath me. My room was one deck up, okay? And immediately after that happened, my porthole, my window, was covered with silk. It just turned dark. Well, I jumped out of bed and got dressed, okay? And as soon as I got my boots on, I noticed that smoke was coming out of my air conditioning vent. So the next thought that crossed my mind was, I need to get outside. So I grabbed a washcloth, got it wet, threw it over my face because I knew the passageway was going to be filled with smoke. Opened the door to my room, and sure enough, it was. Now, I was lucky because the door going, the after door or the back door, was just footsteps away. There was only one room between mine and the back door. So I got out the door. The first thing I seen was the upper engine room, where the stack was supposed to have been, but the stack was gone. It was just gone. And there was nothing there but a jagged hole with smoke coming out. And there was debris all over the place. Now, the two guys that were working up there, cutting the crane, they had disappeared. They were two welders. They weren't part of the crew. They were just contractors with the company. They were coming and going on that ship for several years. They knew everybody. They were likable guys. They got along with the crew fine. But they didn't exist anymore. Now, that tank, the inboard side of that tank, is where the engine controls were up against, down in the engine room. Okay, and a long time ago, someone had built a nice enclosure around it, put air conditioning in there. It was real nice. So when that tank exploded, it exploded inboard, obviously. And those two fellows on watch, I'll talk about them. I'm not going to mention any names, okay, out of respect for the dead and respect for anyone else that is still alive that might be watching this, okay? I know you're just as sensitive about this as I am, and you might think I'm enjoying telling this story, but believe me, I'm not. I just feel that this story must be told. But I'm going to stop right here and tell you what we did in the next episode. So until then, clear skies and calm seas.